Welcome to the School of Mythosynthesis. We are Katie and Peter, and we're honored to guide you on a journey of awakening, alignment, and becoming. Every week, we bring you tools, teachings, and transmissions designed to enable you to embody your true essence and live from the inside out with clarity, sovereignty, and passion. And today, we're going to explore the blocks to freedom, which is mostly fear, and also its opposite power, which is faith and courage. Lord Maitreya, which is a world teacher, gives us a beautiful teaching about fear takes many forms like colored feathers or wings that weigh us down. But for every fear, there is a weapon of courage and faith to overcome it. So, Peter, there are, like I said, many colors, so like a rainbow of feathers, of fears. And so I'm going to ask you just some different questions about the different colors and what type of fear they represent. So with blue feathers, what fear does that represent?
So the blue feather represents the frozen terror, fear of frozen terror. And an example is, when a person gets on stage to give a speech or to address the crowd, and all of a sudden they just freeze. This huge fear overwhelms them or takes over the system. That's an example of the blue feather, the frozen terror.
Perfect. And then we have the green feather. What type of fear is that?
Oh, yeah, that's the trembling betrayal fear. When you feel that you shared something of, secret and, something really valuable, precious information with a friend, and that friend, shares it with someone else. Or when, a friend says something that is not nice about your friend that you trust to another friend, that feeling of being betrayed, that fear of, being alone is the trembling betrayal, the green feather.
And then what about the yellow feather?
The yellow feather is the fear of, avoidance. Sometimes a person might be afraid to confront a specific situation. It's a silent crawling away, avoiding specific interactions or specific conversations. It could be with a spouse or with a friend, as opposed to being, silent, as opposed to being vocal, verbal. The individual becomes silent and walks away, as opposed to, again, expressing their truth.
I often feel tired when I have some type of fear, like I don't want to do something that's out of my comfort zone. So thank you for that one. And then
Mhm.
the red feather.
The red feather is the frenzy heartbeat, and that shows up typically when something happens suddenly and unexpectedly, when a person is not prepared, an individual is not prepared for, for that occurrence. The example that I was given in the book, The Rise of Superman, by I think it's Daniel Kohyman. Yeah. And he talks about when an individual, you're about to go out and you open the door, and all of a sudden there's someone standing on the opposite side of the door. Most people are become afraid because in the mind there was no expectation that there will be anyone on the opposite side of that door. So when something happens that's unexpected, because the mind was expecting things to go in a specific linear pattern, but something shows up that was not planned or was not anticipated, that fear comes up, overrides the person's system. So that's the red feather frenzy heartbeat.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think that most of us have probably already experienced one, if not all of them so far, and we do have a couple left. Before we continue, though, I do invite you to like and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more of this, and also if you have different topics that you'd like to learn about, put them in the comments below so that we can make sure to hit those as well. So moving on to the next, the white feather.
The white feather, yes. Hidden truths, the white feather speaks of, a person staying silent, a typical example of that type of fear is when you have, a person in a boardroom, a meeting, and they know, the truth, they know what, how to solve a specific problem or what really happened in a specific interaction or issue, and they don't speak up in that scenario because they are afraid of being judged or being rejected by, by the other members of the boardroom as well.
I see this in relationships often too, both directions. So it's beautiful to be able to bring these things to surface because we can find
Absolutely.
light in the darkness, which brings us to the black feather.
Yes. And the black feather is more existential in nature. So a person's fear of an existential crisis or not non-existence or falling into the abyss. A person could find themselves wandering, during sleep or during the night hours, thinking about the essence of existence and thinking, what if everything is just, not real? And what if, after this experience of life, they do not exist anymore? That idea of not being or yeah, not being in existence. What does it feel like to not be at all, to not exist at all? Can get a person frozen and also not wanting to take action, because they're just, stuck in the thought that there's a possibility of them not non-existing or non-existent possibility of their being. And so that's the falling into the abyss black feather.
It's interesting, and it does make me think of even, and I think it is different, but so it'd probably be the first one, when we wonder about like we don't do something and then we regret it. And so I see some stuff and some very big links in all of these fears. It's very cool. Thank you. So then the gray feathers are the subtle disguised fears. So can you elaborate on what that represents?
The gray feathers are, they might call them the insects or the cockroaches that lurk within
Mhm.
a person's psyche because they are really subtle. A person can disguise a specific fear with subtle things like, um, if a person says, hey, what, let's go out, to get something and it's a bit dark outside and they're afraid, they could just say, hey, what, there's a show on, I really want to watch this show. There are subtle ways that an individual disguises specific fears without recognizing it. A fear of the dark, or it could be fear of water, it could be fear of, people, of specific fears. And a person, for example, could also disguise it with being busy with work, like, oh, their fear of having interactions with family, or even could be with, spending time with siblings, and they just, avoid it through work. And so, yeah, you find that it shows up in scenarios that really tiny, tiny things that shouldn't really constitute anything for a person to be afraid of would then be covered up by some other replaced, but with some other activity. And the truth behind it is that the individual is actually afraid of either delivering something, submitting something, doing some specific task, or going to complete a specific assignment or have a specific conversation, and it's being replaced by subtle other activities.
Beautiful. So it just so happens that I journaled about fear the other day with a mentor. And what I said in that journaling is that the truth is when you get to the other side of fear, you realize five things. One, that there's nothing to fear in the first place. Two, you don't actually know how good it can be if you've never experienced something before. Three, you have to often break down to break through. Four, you don't want to arrive at the end of your life with regrets, so live today. And five, be honest with yourself. So it's a very beautiful gift to be able to, again, bring these fears to light so that we can transmute them, which takes us
Absolutely.
into, oh, sorry. And do you want to say anything about transmuting fear before we go into the weapons of courage and faith, or like, because you've been through your own dark night of the soul as well. And so I'm sure that you've had fears come up for you and all of that. And so, do you have anything that you'd like to say about transmuting that fear?
Absolutely. It's yeah, the weapons we use essentially, these weapons enable us to transmute the fear. Each of them have, a countermeasure, antidote, so to speak, that enable us to overcome that overwhelming feeling or underwhelming feeling, the case may be, if it's subtle.
That's beautiful. And it fears that stepping stone, right? To help us to grow. So with the weapons of courage and faith, the what would the blue feather, what would that weapon be?
So the weapon that will counter or counteract the frozen terror. It's just steadfastness, steadfast courage, meaning that despite of, irrespective of the overwhelming feeling of, just freezing when something happens, a person composes themselves and just takes the first step, you know, takes a step at a time to overcome or to surmount, that fear. It could be, think about climbing a mountain and you look and say, wow, what a huge mountain. You take the first step and before you know it, you're at the top of the peak of the mountain.
And then with the green feather and that fear was betrayal and abandonment, what would the opposite or the courage and faith side be about?
Yeah, the fear of being abandoned, it could be a friend or a spouse, a partner that you feel could let you down, let a person down in any way, is the understanding that we are never alone. We have guides, we have, the teachings of, ascended masters and, other teachings explain to us about having an invisible helper with us all the time. We might not be able to see them with our physical eyes, but as children, we recognize that children always have this invisible friend. And as we get older, the concept of having an invisible helper sort of like diminishes as we become more focused on the outer consciousness. But the weapon, that we use against fighting the fear of betrayal and abandonment is recognizing that we are never alone. The Spirit stands beside us, and we have invisible helpers beside us at all points in our evolutionary journey.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And just with speaking about the invisible helpers, yes, calling them in, and then also sometimes again, stepping outside and having that higher perspective, because oftentimes when we're in the fire, there's something bigger happening for us. It's something in our life is being transformed to make space for something new. And so sometimes that fear is just, again, there to be that catalyst. And so with the yellow feather and the wisdom and weapon for that.
Absolutely. It's the yellow feather talking about, avoidance, cowardice. When an individual feels, they are avoiding, avoiding a conversation with a partner or a spouse, for example, or siblings or parents, this is just noble responsibility, really. A person shows up, and when it's uncomfortable, they think about truth. They think about what would I rather have in this scenario to continue to, hide under the burden of pretense or just express the truth and recognize that eventually that truth does set a person free. So it's just being uncomfortable, making oneself comfortable with being uncomfortable to express the truth in that scenario. And irrespective of what happens next, they recognize that they took the right step to express the truth as opposed to hiding it. So not looking too much at the outcomes of what they're about to do, but just being comfortable with the fact that they are able to express the truth.
Thank you. And then with the red feather and the panic anxiety, what would be the weapon for that one?
Yes, panic and anxiety most of the time shows up in the energy in the body, and doctors and psychotherapists, practitioners would advise that you just take a deep breath when you have a person has a panic attack, for example. There's really nothing to be afraid of, but the body just starts to feel this heightened amount of fear. The breaths help to calm and to relax the heartbeat, bring it into homeostasis, enter into silence and the stillness, and get into a relaxed state. So just inhale faith, exhale fear, inhale faith, exhale fear.
It's beautiful. And thank you for tips for each and every one of these. So with the white feather, fear of speaking the truth.
The white feather, a person exposed to, large group of people and has to express their truth and they're afraid, really, the real fear is that judgment or rejection of their idea. They'll feel, really demeaned or feel really small because the idea where it wasn't taken. In that scenario is really recognizing that what truth they express out of love. They don't express the truth because of the ego. Is when it's done from the perspective of self-aggrandizement or self trying to make a pronouncement. it's then returns with that, shame or guilt or sadness because the self was involved. But when it's done out of love and out of just a genuine, sincere heart, the return is not really doesn't really affect the individual because the individual was focused more on love, not focused on the outcome. So it's all remembering always to speak our truth out of love, and our hearts are flooded with love. So we're always forgiving, irrespective of what happens after we have expressed the truth.
And forgiveness is huge. That's how we heal. And
Absolutely.
then the black feather is the existential dread. And what would be the weapon for that one?
Existential crisis or dread or threats essentially make a person feel what happens if they are non-existent, and that's a big illusion, right? Because a person, when properly self-identified, recognize that it's not our personality that's our true identity. Our identity is beyond this embodiment. Our identity is eternal. And so that fear is really responding to the fact that when fear says, I end here, faith answers, I am eternal. Our identity is connected to the fact that the creator of the universe, everything that is eternal, and each one of us are a piece of this eternal being. Therefore, we respond with truth to that thought of, non-existence, existential threat or dread or fears that if the creator exists, therefore I exist, therefore there is no possibility for me to be non-existence. As long as the creator and the consciousness exists, I am. So it's really switching a person's identity from the lower personality to their true I am self.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so, just being able to again see the fear and then bring it to the surface. And so, being able to name that. So, we're going to invite you guys to do a practice at home. And in addition to naming it, if you want, some people really like journaling. I find that there's a lot of truths within us that come out when we do the journaling process. And even just if you're not a big journaler, talking to yourself and sometimes talking to ourselves out loud, because all the answers are within us. And sometimes we are able to see that there was nothing to fear, or that maybe we need to set different boundaries. And so that we can be in that state of forgiveness and, or maybe even being able to see, oh, maybe that's not so scary and maybe I want to do this on my bucket list. And so when we can name the fear and then call its opposite, and then if you can take the time to meditate or just go even into a small pause moment and just see that feather dissolve as you hold it with the weapon of faith. And so there's different ways that you can do this. So whatever feels most comfortable to you, you can see the feather in your hand and dissolving. You can blow it back into the universe. You can then surround yourself with light. There's lots of different tools and techniques. So, but naming it and bringing it to the surface and knowing that it's safe to do so. The shadow work is how we find that forgiveness for ourselves and for others. And that is the true healing. So again, if you like what you heard here, please like, subscribe, and share our videos. And do again, write in the comments what you would like to learn about. And Peter, is there anything more that you'd like to share before we go for today?
Just to your point that we can take, how we transmute this is, in our eyes, we see, for example, the blue feather, and we convert that feather into a sword, and we can convert that into a sword of courage. And that's how we transmute it. We see, hey, here's a feather of fear or frenzy, freezing, and convert because we brought it to our awareness, we convert that into a sword of faith and courage. And that way we transmit all of the fears that show up in our reality.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your enlightenment, Peter, and thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to continuing to grow with you. Much love.